Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Code Along. My name is Reese, and I'm going to be your moderator. We're going to kick off the session in a couple of minutes at the top of the hour. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile, though, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. And yeah, tell us something that you'd specifically like to learn in today's session. Today's Code Along is going to be hosted in Datacamp Workspace. So if you don't have an account already, please get registered for one. I'll be posting a link shortly so that you can code along with us. And I'll also be posting a link so that you can get registered for the event today. If you get registered, we will send you the slides, the resources, everything, and the recording as well. So if you need to pop off, if you miss anything, then you can rewatch the recording at your own leisure. Brilliant. I'll post those links shortly, and I'll be back to repeat these messages for any new joiners shortly. But until then, enjoy the background music. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Code Along. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in about 15 seconds or so. We've just been waiting, so everyone has had a chance to join. Let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. And if you've got any questions throughout the session, please let us know in the chat and the comments as well. Today's Code Along is going to be hosted in Datacamp Workspace. So if you don't have an account already, make sure you get signed up for one. There'll probably be some time at the start of the session for you to do that. I've posted a link so that you can code along with us, and I'll also put a QR code on screen as well. But yeah, go have a look for the link in the comments so that you can code along with us today. Outside of that, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. If you haven't registered already, I've posted a link to that in the chat. You can also go find it on our LinkedIn page as well. And I will be posting the link to the workspace so you can code along with us, as well as the registration link in the chat again multiple times in the following few minutes. So make sure you get both of those sorted at the start of the session. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me. So now I'll hand you over to your host for today's session, Richie. Richie, please take it away.
Hi there, data scamps and data champs. This is Richie, and today we're going back to basics. We're going to cover some of the core skills around visualizing data and creating a narrative from those plots. So these are things that I feel everyone needs to know, whether or not data is in your job title. It's just a fundamental skill for modern life. So our guest today is Camilo Martinez, and he's an assistant professor in economics at the Universidad del Rosario and a public policy consultant at Virtus Global. He's also the instructor for the data storytelling case study on green businesses. This is a Datacamp course, and that's what this session is based on. So with that, over to you, Camilo.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. Welcome to this live coding training about green businesses. As Richie mentioned, the focus of this talk will be on some core and beginner skills that every data analyst and data scientist would need in order to develop their job successfully. So yeah, please, yeah, awesome. So let's get going. The structure of this talk will be divided into main pieces. First, we'll talk about a little bit about data storytelling, about what that entails, what it involves, and the main issues that one needs to take into account in order to tell a story successfully aided with data. Secondly, we'll talk about some kinds of plots that you could use and you could leverage to tell your stories effectively. I'd like to talk a little bit about the theory behind data visualization. So there's one key slide that I will mention that I feel will be very interesting to you. And finally, we'll explore some of the data in the course of about green businesses using Datacamp's workspaces, which is an awesome tool that helps you both write code manually in the case that you are experienced with that, and also to use AI to help you perform exploratory data analysis. We'll get into that a little bit later. So yeah, first, as Richie mentioned, I'm Camilo Martinez. I'm located in Bogota, Colombia, and I work as a public policy, data analysis, and innovation consultant. I have a master's degree in economics. I'm very passionate about data science, programming, and the data and the power of data to influence decision making. And I also work as an assistant professor of computational methods for public policy at Universidad del Rosario. So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I love sharing and learning about this thing, and I'm very happy that you're here for this code along. So about the training, most of the materials in this presentation come from the data storytelling case study about green businesses. This is a case study that is already live at Datacamp. It uses a data set about green businesses from the Ministry of the Environment in Colombia, which has information about the city and the municipality in Colombia where the green business is located, and some characteristic variables about the specific sector that it is in, the kind of performance that it holds in the data set from the Ministry of the Environment. And throughout the course, there's an exploration about some concepts of data storytelling, but also some hands-on exercises about choosing some good data visualizations and some best practices about creating those data visualizations. So if you're interested in the topics that we discussed here today in the talk, I strongly encourage you to check out the course in the platform. So if you're talking about data storytelling, we'll first need to talk about stories. Well, stories in general, there are many definitions that you could take that one can come from to talk about stories. But basically, stories are a connected series of events told through very different means. It could either be through words, both written or spoken, so in conversations, in books, in blog posts, in newspaper articles, through images, photos, or galleries, and many other means, also through music, through audio, and kind of this place itself is a means of data storytelling that uses both sound and image and conversation. And there are many other mediums like body expressions and, well, many other kinds of communication. So at the most fundamental level, stories are that connected series of events told through very different means. In this case, we'll focus on visual storytelling because it will be aided with plots, but you could also have many other approaches to telling your stories and aided with data. So how and why is this storytelling important? Well, storytelling is the art of learning how to tell stories that connect with your audience. The how, it involves the message that you're trying to convey to your audience, the senses through which it's transmitted to your audience. It's related to the thing that I mentioned before in the previous slide about if it's written, if it's a conversation, if it's an image, you're using different kinds of senses. So you're using your eyes, your ears, I don't know, in art exploration, in art galleries, you could use also touch and other kinds of senses. In this case, again, focused on visual storytelling. The connection that you create with your audience, because it doesn't matter only the fact that you're communicating or saying something through a medium, but also the way that it stays with your audience and converts itself into meaningful decisions and meaningful insights. And finally, emotion, which is one of the ways that you could aid that connection with the audience that you're trying to communicate. And finally, something that is specific to the case that we're talking today, which is data, because it's, in this case, you could tell stories again through many mediums, but the focus of Datacamp's mission and the focus of your job as a data analyst or a data scientist will also be to use data to communicate effectively. So there are many things that now you need to take into account. We'll talk about some of these in later slides. But most importantly, it's the why. Why does it matter that we know how to tell stories using data? Why does it matter that you're here trying to learn about storytelling? Well, first, it's a very interesting way to draw your audience. So draw the attention of the people you're trying to communicate with. Think about your audience as many different people according to your job or your personal interests. It could be your boss at your organizations. It could be, in general, civil society or citizens if you're trying to raise awareness of a certain public policy issue. It could be a policymaker inside a government organization. And those audiences will have different needs, different priorities, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Second, it can convey emotions. As I mentioned before, emotions is a very powerful tool to engage with your audience and to manage to or to convert whatever findings you create as a data analyst using whatever statistical, mathematical, or other type of tools into meaningful decisions. And finally, and most importantly, that it can resonate afterwards. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your model is. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your data is, how representative, how important it is for your particular issue of interest. It needs to resonate with your audience afterwards in order to convert into decisions. And this is kind of something that I tend to repeat a lot, but those analyses need to convert into meaningful decisions. So stories can help resonate those insights afterwards, so that it keeps the interest of the policymaker, of the citizenship, of your private organizations, or whatever audience you're talking about. So in the book Telling Stories with Data, Rohan Alexander proposes a very interesting workflow for data storytelling. You will realize throughout doing your own processes and your own jobs that this workflow can have variations that you can adapt it to your own needs. But I think this is a good starting point to create a very meaningful storytelling product. So this sample workflow, it described in this book, is divided into 5 main points. First, you'll need to plan and sketch an endpoint. Second, simulate and consider the simulated data. Third, acquire and prepare the actual data. Fourth, explore and understand the actual data. And finally, share what was done and what was found. So let's have a look into each one of these workflow steps. First, there's plan and sketch an endpoint. You might realize throughout your previous experience that there are many possible ways to tackle a problem, to tackle a question that you could solve with data. So if the question is, I don't know, in the case of green businesses, what are the main challenges for the creation of green businesses in Colombia, which is kind of some of the questions that are addressed in the case study. There are many ways to do so. Many questions that you could ask the dataset, many kinds of plots that you could use set data and set insights to propose some ideas or propose some solutions to your audience. But the main point in this step is you could keep going at this process of thinking and overthinking the many ways that you could tackle a problem. Planning and sketching an endpoint forces you to like choose an approach and try to explore that approach. So this could mean just proposing a question that you want to answer and literally sketching in a piece of paper what kind of data you want to have or you would need to have, and also what kind of product you would like to have at the end. So maybe in the case of the question about the promotion of green businesses in Colombia, I would like to have a line plot about the evolution of said businesses to raise awareness about the decrease in the creation of businesses in the last year, for instance. So it's a very short step, literally maybe sketching or writing in a piece of paper or in a Word document. I want to have at the end of the exercise these kinds of product, but it forces you to choose an approach and to like experiment with that and to implement it. So that's the first step. Second, it's simulate and consider the simulated data. So this, before one might think that the first step is to already get the data or to get hands-on with coding or to performing your data analysis. This step proposes something different. It says, hold on, let's think about some ways that you could materialize that sketch that you made before. So for instance, in the case of this line plot, I would need to have a year variable. I would need to have some observations about the number of green businesses. And throughout those variables, I could eventually get to the final product of this line plot. So in this case, you will need to imagine what kinds of data you would like to have, what kind of variables, what kind of features, what kind of characteristics that data set will need to have in order to complete your task. This is very interesting because it forces also to create this first approach or this first idea of how to perform your analysis, and this will contrast with the next step, which is acquiring and preparing the actual data. Not always you will have available the best possible amounts of data. Not always the government organizations have open data portals with relevant information. Not always the information which is relevant to your analysis will be public. And this back and forth between simulating and acquiring and preparing the actual data will leave you very valuable insights about what kinds of information is available or not. You will realize that throughout doing more and more data storytelling products, you will start acquiring some kind of taste or some kind of intuition about what stuff is available, what stuff is not, and to go through these steps in a shorter way. So right now we have planned and sketched an endpoint. We have simulated and thought about what kinds of data we will need to complete successfully our data storytelling product. And we have acquired and prepared the actual data, which can be in many formats. You could find it in tables, or if you're performing other kinds of analysis, you could find it in texts, in web pages and images and other kinds of formats. Now it's time to explore and understand the actual data. This is the moment of the process where you will use your models, your statistical techniques, you'll create indicators, you'll create summaries to process said data. So this is where I believe, well, between the preparing the actual data and this exploring and understanding the actual data is the place where most of the time of a data analyst or a data scientist lies. In this case, you'll use techniques from just creating a summary, grouping variables, saying like, I want to count the number of businesses by department or by municipality. So you're creating an indicator of a counter. You will try to create means and other statistical measures to summarize populations. So which is the mean risk? I don't know. Let's imagine that those green businesses have ranking or some kind of notes or some kind of grade about their performance. So which is the mean performance of those businesses by municipality, by region, or eventually trying to create a more sophisticated model that tries to explain those grades in terms of other variables like the population of each department, like the education of the people that are running said businesses and other kinds of stuff. So there are many ways that you could explore and understand the data. The main thing is try to permanently ask questions. You're trying to have a conversation with your data. So ask questions every time, and those questions will lead you on to the adequate means, the adequate methods to answer those questions, and will lead to valuable insights to make decisions. Again, the final or the main issue about this thing is to make decisions. So these decisions either being private organizations, civil society, citizens, or public sector will lead to variable insights. And finally, share what was done and what was found. So again, you as a data scientist or a data analyst will have uh, successfully completed some analysis. You will successfully have extracted some insights from your data, but you're the one that knows how that was done. You're the one with the expertise and with the whole again the whole story about what you did. But you need to communicate that with other persons. So a simple plot is not enough. A simple table with the results is not enough. You will need to tell what you did. So here it's a step where you try to create some text or some companion paragraphs where you'll say, so yeah, I'm trying to analyze the environment, the context of green businesses in Colombia. There's some data that I found from the Ministry of the Environment that deals with A, B, C, and D variables. This is very important because I want to promote sustainable practices and to help, achieve the global sustainable goals. And from that, I I performed this analysis. I took this table, I created these indicators using these variables, and I created this plot that shows this result about the evolution of the green businesses throughout the years. This result is important because it highlights the relevance or the impact that the pandemic had on the creation of new businesses, and this is relevant for policymakers to create new ways to promote the creation of these businesses. This is, again, a couple of paragraphs, a couple of sentences, but will give a lot of context to your audience about what you did and kind of explain this whole workflow in general for someone that doesn't have the whole picture that you did with your analysis. This last part is one of the most important, and you need to remember always that you may have some expertise and you may have some further knowledge about statistical methods, about mathematical methods, about the plots that you created, but not always your audience will have the same background knowledge. So sharing what you did in a simple language without requiring some very technical jargon, and the most importantly, the ways that whatever you're doing is important for the goals of your audience is key. So this is, again, a brief overview of the sample workflow. I believe it is very, very useful to begin with, and I encourage you to try it, to experiment it, and also if you want to have further information about this workflow, follow the link in tellingstorieswithdata.com, which is the one that where the book is allocated. So there's some key issues that you need to take into account throughout the whole workflow. First, there's the question. So I mentioned before that one begins the data storytelling process with a question. However, there are two main approaches to this issue. First, it's to begin data first, and second, to begin question first. So kind of the one that I explained before is question first. I begin with the question, how can I promote the green businesses in Colombia for achieving the global sustainable goals. And based on the question, I designed the kinds of products and outputs. I sketched the kinds of outputs that I wanted to create to answer that question, and then went on to simulating and retrieving the data, performing the analysis, and afterwards telling the story. But you can also start data first. You may stumble upon an interesting data set. You may stumble upon an open data portal, which many governments and cities have. And you want to say, okay, what can this information give me, and what kind of relevant information can this data give me? So you could either approach this with a question first way, again, thinking about a problem that you would like to solve, or second, data first. I could have this data set and perform the same analysis. I simulate a product that I would like to have from this data set. I say what kinds of variables and what kind of descriptions from this data set I could use to create that product, that plot, that table, that whatever. And finally, performing the analysis and sharing your results. So that's the first thing. Second, let's talk about the audience. As I have mentioned a couple times before in this talk, you're not trying to give or to create an analysis in the vacuum. You're always trying, as a data analyst, as a data scientist, to answer to the needs of an audience. Again, private organizations, your direct boss, your policymakers, or a ministry of certain topic in the government, a mayor, a civil society organization, or a public advocacy group. So each one of those groups has different backgrounds, different needs and goals. So you need to take into account many different characteristics. Maybe in some cases, the age, the gender, the technical background of your audience, and according to those variables, you'll start to adjust the ways that you communicate your insights and the ways that you can tell your story. There are some kinds of plots that are more suited for people with technical backgrounds. We'll not cover those in this talk, but for example, there's a box plot that you realize many people in academia or that have a more experienced programming will know about, but maybe a citizen without those knowledge would not understand a box plot. So you'll start fine-tuning the ways that you communicate the message and your insights. And finally, I name it here the message aid, or you could also talk about the medium through which you communicate your insights. So you could use graphs or plots. I'll use those terms interchangeably through the talk. You could also use tables. You could also use, the text itself to communicate your results. And if you choose to use a graph, there are also many choices about which graph you can use. Graphs are very powerful tools of visual storytelling, of converting numerical or categorical information into visual characteristics or visual variables. But there's an art of choosing which kind of graph you choose. There's an art of selecting the most adequate one, especially because there's no best plot. There's no one best graph. There's no best visualization that works in all contexts. Everyone will have some trade-offs, and everyone have some advantages, some disadvantages. And the art as a data analyst or data visualization designer would be to understand those trade-offs and choose the most adequate one according to, again, the question, the audience, and the message or insights that you're trying to convey. So here's the slide that I was talking about regarding visualization that I mentioned before. This comes from a book by Jonathan Schwabish, which is called Better Data Visualization. Basically, again, as I mentioned, how the plots work, they transform data into visual information. And in the book, Jonathan Schwabish proposes this diagram on the right about many different ways, some more accurate, some less accurate, about the ways that a plot communicates information. So I'll stop in this slide a little bit because most importantly, I want you to have the intuition behind plots. and afterwards to check some particular plots. So there are many ways that you could enable accurate estimates in a plot. It could be positioned according to common scales. So you may have seen bar plots or line plots. We'll talk about them later. There are also some plots that use length, visual length, to transform a numerical variable into some visual thing that you could understand very quickly. There are some graphs that use direction or slope, angle, or parts of a whole. There's a small diagram of a pie chart. And going down that scale, you could use shading and color hue to also communicate more categorical or even numerical information. So this is just a small and maybe incomplete inventory of many ways that plots transform your data into visual information that your readers and your audience can understand. The main or one of the key takeaways I want you to have here is this scale is from up to down is in accurate terms. It says more accurate or less accurate, or here it says general estimates, but it doesn't mean better or worse. It's just accurate and less accurate. Again, this comes into play with the one thing that I was saying before about how there are no best plots. Sometimes you would like for your audience to have very specific and very accurate estimates about your data. Sometimes it isn't as necessary. You want them to see some general trends. So your job and the invitation that I also have with this talk is try to experiment with many different kinds of plots, many different kinds of ways to transform your data into meaningful information. And throughout that process, you'll realize and again develop that intuition of when to use certain attributes in the scale, which also means when to use certain plots and when to use another. So now on, from in the following slides, I'll try to explain to you some basic plot types that you may have encountered before. Mainly if you have used Excel before and some basic data visualization tools, you may be familiar with these. If you maybe these are also very used in newspaper articles, in television news and blog posts and etc. So maybe you'll have familiarity with these concepts, but I'd like to kind of dissect each of those plots using these attributes that transform data into visual information. So first, let's start with scatter plots. These are very useful plots to show relationships. In general, they plot the relationship between two variables. Both axes, the x and the y axis, represents the values in the numerical represent the numerical variables, the numerical values of these variables, and the points are located on the intersection between those two values. So each point represents an individual observation in the plot. In this case, using the data set of green businesses that I was talking about, there are some regions in Colombia that are coded in this data, which are the ones that are represented here: Sea Flower, Llanos, Amazon, Santanderes, Coffee Belt, Pacific, Caribbean, and Central region. And I created a plot using the number of businesses for each of those regions versus the population of each of those regions. One question that I wanted to understand is, are there more green businesses according to the regions, or are there more businesses as the region has more population? And this plot kind of gives us an idea that yes, there are, because you could see a positive relationship. As you could see that there's like, as the variable on the x-axis or the horizontal variable increases, the points tend to increase also on the y-axis. So this is one of the plots. Which kind of attribute from the previous slide does this use? I believe that this use position among like the same axis. So the position on the x-axis, the position on the y-axis, and the location of each point according to those two axes is the information that is telling us, yeah, there is kind of a positive relationship. So scatter plots, again, as a summary, are very helpful for showing relationships, and are aided with the position among scales to convey their information. Another kind of plot that you might have encountered are line plots. These are very useful to visualize trends, and especially visualize trends across time. In this case, in general, it's very rare that you encounter a different plot. The x-axis or the horizontal axis will contain the information about time. In this case, the variable is the year that the green business was created. And the y-axis contains the other numerical variable of interest. In this case, the number of green businesses by each year. Basically, the way that these plots show information is that first they begin very similar to scatter plots. You create a location between the points in two axes. I use the time axis and locate the way where it is located on the y-axis. But instead of drawing that through points or through disconnected points, each data point is connected by a line. And how it is connected by the order of the order of time that it makes sense. In this case, the point of 2014 is joined to 2015, from 2015 to 2016, and so on. Which ways does it convey information? You could say position, you could say throughout slope, because you're highly attracted to the ways where the slope of the change from year to year is higher or lower. In this case, for instance, you could be attracted to the way that the number of green businesses decreased a ton between 2019 and 2020, partly because of the pandemic. So yeah, this is a second kind of plot that you might find very useful and that you may have encountered before. Sorry. Let's talk about bar plots. Bar plots are very useful at comparing categories. In this case, the height of each bar represents the value being measured, so kind of similar to the line plot. But in contrast to the previous one, you'll realize that we don't try to use bar plots with numerical variables, but with categorical variables. So in this case, there's a variable in the green business dataset that details how is the performance of said business based on some criteria that the Ministry of the Environment defined. And based on the success rate on those indicators, the ministry defines the success or the results of these green business in these categories: initial, basic, intermediate, satisfactory, advanced, and ideal. So these are not numerical variables or time variables. These are just some categories, some text, or some finite ways in which you could separate your observations. So in this case, I counted the number of green businesses by each of the possible instances of the result variable and created this plot. So the main takeaway, most of the green businesses that are in this dataset are being measured or are being graded as with a satisfactory result or satisfactory performance. In this case, it's more usual to see variations of the plot. So you could see both bars being horizontal or vertical. So in this case, I plotted a horizontal variable, a horizontal bar plot, sorry. And the way that this generally conveys information is through height, or, well, if you throw it horizontally through the width or through the length of the bar. So you may have seen some critics to several data visualizations about the importance of the axis. Here in the bar plots, it's very important to have your axis in a way that makes sense. So in this case, from 0 to the total variable that I would like to plot, in order to be able to accurately compare the bars or the numerical values behind those bars. So here's very important. Next, let's talk about pie charts, some of the most either loved and overused plots or hated plots. There's some very strong opinions about this kind of charts in the data visualizations, in the data visualization area. These are very useful for showing proportions of your information. So as you saw before, I use some categorical variables to count the number of businesses by each result variable. But you could also I could also have plotted that for with a pie chart. In this case, the way that it conveys information is that a size of each slice represents the proportion of the whole. So in this case, on the right, I plotted the green businesses data set by category. There is also a variable about category regarding the sector or the economic sector that the green business belongs to. So in this case, you could very easily see that the most common sector or category that the green business belongs to is biocommerce. So in general, one of the reasons which is for why those plots are very hated or very overused is people tend to use those pie charts for many categories. So you could see pie charts with over 20, 30 categories, and at that point there are many tiny slides, and that doesn't help you actually transmit any insights or any findings from your data. So a key recommendation is those. It's not like don't use pie charts ever or use them every time, but rather use them especially in cases where there are a few categories, so that it actually can let you see the most common or the least common proportions. Here, one tactic to tackle that issue is you could also create another category, the one that is in purple in the right plot. So many times you'll find that that your data does not have some neat categories that are just 4 or 5 categories, but you could construct some bin that can hold all the other ones, the less common ones, and still plot in a very simple way a pie chart. This is one that you may not have encountered before, but is very useful to show also the relationships, kind of similar to a scatter plot, that you could plot in the 2 axes the instances of a variable, but lets you kind of create combinations between variables, create groups within some meaningful variables. So as I mentioned, it's very useful for showing how values are distributed across 2 variables. The x and y axis represent the 2 variables in this case. That's, again, similar to the scatter plot. But notice how in this case I didn't use numerical variables, but on the y-axis I used a categorical variable, and in the x-axis I used a time variable, which is the year. And finally, the way that this plot conveys information is through color. The color of each cell, of each square in those combinations of those variables tells you when the observations are more common or less common. So in this case, you could see, again, the green businesses grouped by the region variable and the year variable. And I was trying to understand which of the combinations were most common. So, for instance, in this case, you could see that the most amount of businesses were created in the central region in 2019. So, again, through categorical or time variables, you could show the most common or the least common observations. But you could also use this kind of plot for many other purposes. Finally, now that we've seen some list of the main plots that you could use, which again, it's not meant to be a comprehensive guide of plots. It's basically some of the most common that you may encounter through your data analysis and data science journey. Let's look at 2 particular best practices that I would like to highlight for developing your plots or your data visualizations, which also will greatly enhance and greatly help the way that you tell stories through data. First, in the case of plots, it's very important to use labels. Labels such as the title, the subtitle, caption, axis titles, and other labels. As you could see in the plot on the right, I used one of the examples before. the one with the bar plot with the results with the result variable. But instead of just showing the bars kind of in a vacuum and asking the reader to understand a whole lot of context to get a meaning, to get an insight from said chart, look at the way that I use the title as an statement. I say the majority of green businesses are classified as satisfactory. Throughout the title, you could start and you could lead the audience to understand the message that you would like to convey directly. And in the subtitle, I explain what is the actual measure or what is the actual plot being created. So in this case, it says number of verified green businesses according to the result variable. Other important labels, axis titles. You will see many times how some plots don't even try to convey to the audience what are the variables being plotted in each of the axes. This is very important because, again, you as a data analyst, you will have all the context and all the information about the ways that you created the plot, but your audience won't. So one of the ways to help them understand and read more quickly the plot is to give them all the information necessary. So in this case, I say the one on the left relates to the result variable, which I may have written some paragraphs or some text explaining what is that result variable and why that is important. And in the case of the x-axis, the number of green businesses. Again, it doesn't matter if you could see the number as self-evident regarding the number of businesses. It's still a good practice to use the labels and is to use axis labels to say exactly what you're trying to show in each of the axes. And finally, the source. There's a small subtitle at the end of the chart which says source, Colombia's Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development. It's very important to use this because for transparency purposes, for accountability purposes, and for trust purposes, it's a good practice to use and to tell the audience where did you get your data from. So if any person would like to replicate your findings or to replicate your analysis, they could do so, or they could also be inspired by the data that you're using to create new analysis or to create other projects. So that's kind of the first part. The second part is the use of color. So I won't get into too much detail here, but depending on the kind of variable and information that you're trying to show, you may want to use different color palettes. There are some color palettes better suited to showing numerical relationships. There are some color palettes better suited for categorical relationships, and you'll again develop an intuition of when to use each of the color palettes in each case. Secondly, consistency. Consistency relates, for instance, if as you saw before, I tried to use the same Datacamp color palette in all of the plots before. If I had used I don't know, a purple background and orange bars, it may have seemed a little bit out of place. So consistency is very important when you're trying to work with a brand, so a government brand or a private organization brand. You'll try to use the same colors every time. And also, if you use in one plot the color blue to represent, I don't know, 2019 and purple to represent 2020, it makes sense that in every plot that you're trying to codify your variables by those same 2 years, you'll also use blue for 2019 and purple for 2019. Changing the color palette or changing the colors that you use may be disorienting when you have more than one plot and one table or one data storytelling product. And finally, one thing that I have here is taking into account color brightness. Not every person in your audience perceives the plots and the colors and the ways that you showed your graphs in the same way. Color blindness may change a palette that you see in an adequate way into something that they cannot differentiate the information being conveyed in the plot. So here is an example of how the color palette is perceived in normal vision and how it is perceived in 3 different conditions of color blindness. So you'll need to take this into account in order to better convey your data for every person, first. And second, these kinds of issues also can help you for people that don't have color blindness. So think about if you have been in a situation where there's a beautiful plot using a lot of colors, but then the person that prints that in a physical sheet of paper prints it in a grayscale. So you suddenly cannot read the plot in that way. So taking into account these kinds of issues can also help you in many other situations, apart from just the people that have color blindness. So this has been kind of a general overview of both what is data storytelling and what are some of the ways or some of the plots that you could use to create your data storytelling products. Now we'll move on to a simple exercise on Datacamp. On Datacamp workspaces, which is a very interesting tool to experiment with doing these kinds of analysis, and most importantly, that it doesn't require very extensive code experience. So just a second, I'll put the data. I'll put the now you can see it. Now you could see it here. So how do you access your data workspace, your Datacamp workspace? Well, that's you go to your Datacamp home. I am not signing here, but you will see on the top left part there's a place where you'll see Learn, and then on the right you'll see Workspace. And this will lead you to an interface where you create Workspace, very similar to the ones that are here. So what are workspaces? There are some environments in which you can implement both text and code to start creating a data storytelling process in Datacamp servers using some data analysis languages. You will see on the main page when you load in a workspace, you will see something like this, well, without the information that is contained here. How does a workspace or how does this interface work? This interface over here is called a notebook. It's very similar to Jupyter notebooks. Maybe you have heard about this term before if you have a little of experience with data analysis before. But this basically means is kind of a canvas where you can put both text or comments or whatever that you would like to create paragraphs of or add context about the code that you are implementing, and also code to create your analysis. So, for example, here, I'll use it in edit mode. You can create. Hold on, it isn't letting me. Give me just a second because it doesn't let me have edit permissions. Here it is. Sorry for the problem. So as I was saying, you can create some code blocks, some blocks in general, with those plus signs that you could see here in the base. So whenever you add one of those blocks, you could choose AI. We'll get into that a little bit later. But in general, you could use text, Python, SQL, SQL codes, and chart. For the time being, let's focus just on the text and the AI codes to help you do this experimental analysis. So in the text block, you could say, hi, you could write, hi, this is a text block. And this is the way that I created these comments both in the rest of the notebook. So again, think about the data storytelling process that I mentioned before, and think about that last step on the data storytelling workflow about sharing your results. You could use those text blocks to create those paragraphs and to create that context for the audience. Hi, this is a data set that I downloaded from the page from the Ministry of the Environment of Colombia. I'm trying to answer this question. I'm trying to create this data set has these variables which are important for these reasons. Those variables contain information about the result, which is a categorical variable, has a number detailing whatever, and kind of giving all the context, and then saying why your analysis is important. So this is kind of the mechanism in which through the notebook in the workspace you can convey your story, and then through the code, in this case Python blocks, and now the ones created with AI, we could perform the analysis, the relevant analysis. So before going on to the actual examples, there's another thing that I would like to explain to you, and that is that you could add files or external connections to your notebook in your workspace. So in the case of this workspace, I have already loaded the Green Business dataset, this is a table in a CSV format that you could download itself you could access it from here, from the workspace, but also from the case study page that I mentioned before. So this is basically a table that contains the variables that I mentioned before. It has some sectors, it has the result of the green business, it has the department and the municipality where that green business was created, and well, other relevant information. So now, how can we interact with this? And let's say we don't have any coding experience. One of the most powerful tools here in the workspaces is that you could create instructions aided by large language models using this AI page here. So let's say I want to load in a dataset with the help of this AI. I don't have any experience using Python before, and I haven't worked out the ways that workspaces and the folders in contained within those workspaces work. So let's try to give a simple command to the AI. I will say, please read the green businesses dataset using Python. The large language model will look into the folder of our workspace. Again, it will see that we have a green business CSV over here, and from that, getting to understand the instruction and understanding the structure of our folder and the files that are within it, it will basically perform that operation with Python. So it loaded the necessary libraries. It created an object called df where the dataset is held, and it printed us the top of the dataset. So as you can see, again, it has all the variables. It has the year, the authority that validated that business, the region, the department, the municipality, the sector and category to which it belongs to, and the result which it was given by the Ministry of the Environment. So this is very interesting, again, because it takes into account the structure of your folder, but also the instruction that you gave it. Now that we have loaded this data set in our workspace, we could start asking questions. We could start experimenting in this data storytelling workflow that we were talking before. So let's say that I wanted to know the number of green businesses in total. So here it was showing to me just 5 observations, but let's say I wanted to say, okay, how many green businesses are in total in this data set? Well, let's ask that same question. I'll create a block with the AI characteristic, and I will say, please count the number of entries in the green business dataset. And it, again, understood our our instruction, understood also the variables which are created. Again, I create the dataset was saved as df in this Python code, so it loaded the correct dataset and performed the correct analysis to give me back the answer, which are there are 2,325 observations in this dataset. Let's experiment with a little bit more. So we could say now, let's try some plots. So we could see, for example, I wanted to see again the one that we saw before in the presentation examples. Let's see a line plot about the ways that the number of green businesses has evolved by year. So this time I won't type it manually. I will type the instruction that I have over here. So I say, please create a line plot that shows the evolution of the number of entries grouped by year. And it will create, albeit with a different theme, but it will show us a very similar plot. So again, you could ask the code some more complex instructions. What I want to highlight here is that you could say, like, okay, so why is the need to learn about code, or why is the need to learn about all these concepts if I could use basically the instruction from the large language model? You will see that with more complex instructions, it's very useful to know some words or all the jargon related to programming or to data science in order to have better results. So in this case, see that I have to use the words line plot. I have to use the grouped by variable. I have to use some keywords to better get the result that I want before. So this encourages you to have better intuition and better knowledge about the concepts and the ways that those kinds of visualizations or those kinds of products are being talked about in general. Now,
sorry to interrupt it, just because we're coming up to time. Just for the audience, just to let you know, we are going to run a few minutes over. If you do have to jump, then please do check out the rest of the recording when it's sent out to you. Please do register in order to have the recording sent out to you. We have got some great questions from the audience lined up, so we're going to cover those in a moment after Camilo's finished. I just want to say that next week we've got 4 sessions lined up for you. So on Tuesday, we've got another session on data storytelling. So this is going to be effective data storytelling for financial services. On Wednesday, I'm doing a session on ChatGPT Enterprise. On Thursday, I'm doing another session on getting started using GPT and Whisper using the OpenAI API and a bit of Python there. And on Thursday, we've got another sort of a beginner level code along on exploratory data analysis and spreadsheets. So please do go to datacamp.com/webinars in order to join those. All right, with that, Camilo, I'm going to leave you to finish off going through this notebook.
Awesome. So yeah, there's just a couple more examples that I wanted to show you. Again, you could try other kinds of plots over here. So, for instance, I could say, please create a horizontal, again, trying to create the same ones from the presentation. Please create a horizontal bar plot of the number of entries in the dataset grouped by the region variable. So let's leave the AI come up with the accurate code. You can see here's something very similar to the presentation we saw before. You could also fix the mistakes or kind of start iterating over the code that you created. For instance, I could say, please order the results from higher to lower in the bar plot. And let's see. No. Sometimes, as you can see, it doesn't get your instructions, so you need to develop kind of this language. Let's see if when running. No, here it is. Yes, it did. It was me that hadn't clicked on the wrong button. So you could see that this orders the variables in the way that I mentioned. So you could ask it to create with a different color, ask it to create with to use a different title or stuff like that. And finally, something less kind of language intensive or jargon intensive instructions. So maybe ask some more simple questions like, please tell me the number, the most common type of green business according to the result variable. And again, it will look into your data set, into your created objects in your environment, and return this answer, which in this case is the satisfactory, which we know is true from the presentation. So this is basically a sample overview of the ways that you could implement in reality some of the things that we saw in the presentation. You could experiment with loading data sets and asking it questions, performing or developing plots, and in general, kind of getting to know in this conversation with your data, getting to know the insights that come from it. So yeah, this is basically what I had today for the talk. I hope that it was very informative. Informing, very useful for you in your data storytelling and your data science journey. And yeah, I believe, Richie, we have some time for questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, since we're running over, we'll get straight into questions, but thank you for that, Camilo. All right, so first question comes from kind of saying, how can a person getting started with the HR department use storytelling? So I think, human resources teams are ideal for having good stories, I think. Do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I believe this answer will apply not just to specifically human resources, but to every sector. You'll need to first understand, as I mentioned in the presentation, the needs of your audience. I think that in human resources, this audience would be both the corporate team, but also the team that you're managing. So understand both what kinds of information they would like to know in terms of, I don't know, the ways that the people interact within your company, the priorities in terms of hiring people, how to measure the performance of your team. And based on those particular needs, based on those particular interests, you will understand the main indicators, the main insights that you'd like to obtain, and from that point on, develop your data storytelling products and successfully tell your stories. In the end, again, your main point would be to help make decisions, how the people interact in your company, how contracting or hiring decisions are made. So taking both those needs, those interests, and the indicators and the information that you find valuable, you will develop the data storytelling products in different ways.
Great answer. And next question comes from Asia saying, when should you use percentages for bar plot, or when should you use the frequencies, the counts?
I believe that depends on the specific use case. So there's no simple answer for that. Your audience, in again thinking about either government or private organizations, will have some kind of conventions about which way they'd like to see the data represented. So basically, the answer is think about the ways or the conventions that are in your sector and the ways that your audience already understands the indicators that you're showing.
Yeah, very much depends on like what question you're trying to answer. If it's like how many of something, then you want counts. If it's like what proportion of you want percentages. All right. So next question is an interesting one from Federico saying, how do you or do you consider the layout design structure relevant, or is it something so when should you care about the design of your plots? The rule of thirds, that's a photography thing, I think.
Yeah.
I've not heard of Z and F. But yeah, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about designing plots?
Yeah, me neither about the last one, but I think that data, as we saw it today, it was kind of a brief overview about some of the data visualization techniques, but data visualization in itself is kind of its own rabbit hole. It's intersection between, again, data analysis, having knowledge about some kind of mathematics and statistics to know which indicators to present in a plot, but also coding, sometimes coding in or sometimes using interfaces in other programs, but also design. So thinking about colors, thinking about proportions, thinking about fonts, thinking about I don't know, the brand characteristics that you're trying to produce your plots. There are many design considerations. There are Gestalt principles. There are the ways that I showed in the presentations about the ways to show accurate or less accurate information. So design is a very important part of this storytelling process. In the beginning, you'll find that the most important thing is to just create a plot that shows information. But if you get into it in a more deeper sense, you will use design all the time to highlight specific parts of your plot and specific messages in your plot.
Yeah, good answer. And I think we've got time for one last question. I'm sorry, there are tons of great questions from the audience, so sorry if we're not getting to all your questions. But yeah, this one comes from Harry Neva saying, how do you make the audience more engaged? How do you do interaction with the audience?
Awesome. So this answer may be kind of may not be the most satisfactory answer, but again, as always, it depends. It depends on the specific audience that you're targeting and their specific needs and backgrounds and the ways that they interact with your products. One main thing that I want to add here is that you could, in this part of data visualization, you could use static data visualizations, which are the ones that I presented here in the presentation, which is basically an image with the plot and a message, labels or data and etc. But there are also many ways to use interactive data visualization with the digital technologies. So dashboards or something that is animated or something that also has sounds or changes color and that kind of stuff can greatly help your audience feel more engaged. But that comes with the trade-off that it is necessary to have a digital means to do so. This is very specific, and I'll close with this reference with the audience, which is here in Colombia at least, but I believe this is the case everywhere. There are many people which don't have a high data literacy or digital literacy backgrounds. So, for instance, you could say, I want to create the most interactive visualization, which you could go click and have sounds and have pop-ups. But maybe you're trying to present those to elderly population which don't tend to use computers. So you have to balance those two things, both those digital and the necessities of your audience, and many technical ways in which to create those more engaging plots or tables or graphs or other products.
That's absolutely great. And in terms of how much interactivity you can have with the audience, it does depend a lot on the size of the audience. Like, for example, in this session, there are hundreds of you here. So we do very simple interactivity via this Q&A, and occasionally we do things like polls in these webinars. But it's very hard to have a lot of conversations with you one-on-one, as you could do if you were just in a work meeting with like 5 people in there. That way you can have a lot more interactivity. All right, so with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Please do come back next Tuesday for more on data storytelling. So datacamp.com/webinars to sign up. So thank you very much, Camila. That was a really great session. I think just a really nice overview of data visualization and data storytelling. Thanks, and thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. Apologies if we didn't get to your question today. And thank you to everyone who showed up. I will see you all again in future webinars. All right, bye.
Bye.